Have you ever wondered what the right wither blade is for you? Well, if you have, then this is the right video. Today, I'm going to be comparing all 4 wither blades and seeing what all their strengths and weaknesses are, and telling you which one is the best for your playstyle. So to explain the structure of this video, I'm going to be going through each of the 4 wither blades, that being the Astraea, then the Hyperion, and then the Scylla, and then finally moving on to the Valkyrie. Each wither blade is sort of assigned to a different dungeon class, and if you're wondering why there's 4 wither blades and 5 dungeon classes, it's because, you probably guessed it, the admins hate the healer class. Each wither blade has their own special stat or buff which makes them unique, and this is what I'm going to be comparing, later in the video. If you enjoyed the video at all, then please do me a favour and leave a like, and if you're extra cool, then maybe considering subscribing as well. Also, feel free to join my Discord. We host 10 million coin giveaways all the time, and if you want a chance to win some extra money, then link is in the description. And anyway, let's get on with the video. So starting off with the first comparison, we have the Astraea. Now, as you can see from my armor set, the Astraea is designed for beta tanks. Now this is pretty clear to see, because you can see that as base stats it gives you defense and true defense, which in boss fights and stuff is actually pretty useful. And in dungeons you can see that it actually gives you 1260 defense. And don't understate how much defense that is, that's a crazy amount. Damage stats are all pretty normal, 362 damage, 250 strength, 70 crit damage, and we're going to be comparing all these numbers to the later wither blades in the video. As the bonus attribute, it gives you 1 damage and 2 defense for every catacombs level. And as you see with the other wither blades, each one changes, so for instance the Scylla might be crit damage and the Valkyrie might be strength and damage. So real quickly, I'm just going to do a really quick damage test. Bear in mind that this is with an armor with no damage boosts, and also my talismans and my magical bag is configured to sighted. Now if I go hit a zombie, then I'm dealing 53,000 damage. And when I hold it, you can also see in the bottom of my screen I have 3,138 mana, which is of course important when I right click, and you can see how much damage I'm doing right now. Unfortunately, these damage numbers aren't really going to mean much to you because we need to compare it with the other wither blades. And with the base stats and the damage test gone through, let's move on to the Hyperion. So I've just gone ahead and crafted the Hyperion, so let's take a look at the base stats. So as you can see, we have 351 damage, which is actually 10 less than the Astraea, which is quite interesting. We have 250 strength, stayed the same. However, the really big thing is a massive 580 intelligence, which in dungeons, for me at least, with Kata 35, that's 2,150 intelligence, which is a massive amount. Obviously, you do lose the added defense and true defense when you do the Astraea, but you're compromising that with the sheer amount of intelligence. And more intelligence means more magic damage, which is ultimately going to make your life in dungeons a lot easier when you're clearing lots of mobs. As for the catacomb scaling attribute, you got 1 damage and 2 intelligence per catacombs level. So now that the base stats are out of the way, let's move on to the damage tests. So right off the bat, I just want to take a look at the bottom of my screen, and you can see that I've got 3,578 mana, which is a pretty sizable increase from the Astraea, which is around a 400 mana increase. Alright, so now let's go and kill some of the zombies, and you can see here that I'm doing around 52,000 damage, which is 10,000 less damage than the Astraea, and this is probably down to the damage decrease from the Astraea. However, where this really shines is when I use my magic ability. You can see that I'm doing 844,000 damage, and this is around 100k increase from the Astraea. And although 750k to 850k when you're killing a zombie with 100 health isn't that much of an increase, in dungeons that just all multiplies and it really ramps up your damage. Overall, the Hyperion is clearly designed for mage because it has a really good intelligence and therefore buffs the magic damage by a ton. So now I've gone ahead and transformed my Hyperion into a Scylla. Now this is a bit of a weird one, because technically it's kind of supposed to be the archer version of the wither blade. But if you look at the archer bonus, that it actually minuses the melee damage. Hypixel?
What?
Anyway, let's take a look at the base stats. So the damage is the same as the Astraea and is 10 higher than the Hyperion, or technically 11 higher. However, the unique bonus of the Scylla is the crit chance and the crit damage it gives. It gives around 70 more crit damage, and it also gives a little bit of crit chance, which is quite nice. However, all of the other stats are the same, and you can see as a Wither Blade, the attribute is that you grant 1 damage and 1 crit damage per Catacombs level. Now there is something quite important I have to say about the Scylla. Now as I just said before, the Scylla gives bonus crit damage, and if you didn't know, the Wither Impact, that gives you more healing depending on how much crit damage you have. So the more crit damage you have, the more it's actually going to heal you. And this is something that you may want to take into consideration when you're deciding what Wither Blade to buy, because it actually gives the most healing. Anyways, I'm just going to take a look at my mana count again. Because it's not the Hyperion and therefore does not give any bonus mana or intelligence, this means that my mana is just going to be at the 3100 mark, which is what it was for the Astraea. Now for the damage test, let's go and test our left click damage, and you can see here that we're doing 62,000 damage. And this is a pretty sizable increase from the Hyperion and the Astraea, and this is around a 10k damage increase from around 50k to 60k. This is probably down to the added crit damage that you get, so for single hit damage, so far the Scylla takes a crown. Now let's go into the magic damage. This is most likely going to be the same as the Astraea, which of course, as we just saw, it is, because as you mentioned earlier, the Scylla does not give any bonus to intelligence unlike the Hyperion. Alright, so now the tests with the Scylla are complete. Let's move on to the final Wither Blade, the Valkyrie. Alright, so we got our Scylla here, and now we're going to craft it into the Valkyrie with these Diamantes handles. And this was about 8 mil down the drain, but here goes. So now we crafted our fresh new Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is intended as the berserker weapon of the Wither Blade, and this is because it gives strength, damage, and also ferocity, which is really useful in dungeons especially. Now let's just go compare the base stats. So the damage is 362, like the Astraea and the Scylla. The strength, however, gets a noticeable increase with around a 30 strength increase, and this is most likely to buff our damage by a sizable amount. However, the crit damage does stay the same. However, what the Valkyrie really does offer is a good amount of ferocity it gives. It gives 30 extra ferocity compared to all of the other Wither Blades, and this goes to 90 ferocity in dungeons. And all of these things make the Valkyrie a very popular choice when choosing what to swap with when you do the AATS swap. For the Catacombs scaling ability, you can see that it grants 1 damage and 1 strength per Catacombs level, and it's clear to see why this weapon is specifically designed to maximize your damage. So with the base stats out of the way, let's move on to the damage test. So instantly you can see here that we've basically got around the same amount of mana, and it's just the Hyperion that gives a decent extra amount of mana. So let's move on to the damage tests. You can see here that we're dealing 56,000 damage. Now interestingly, this is actually quite a sizable amount less than a Scylla, and the single hit damage is most likely less because you don't get the extra crit damage as you would with the Scylla. But what you need to factor in is the extra 30 ferocity, and this really does increase your DPS by a really good amount. So although the Scylla does actually do more single hit damage, over time and DPS, the Valkyrie will always be on top. And the right click, as all the other ones, is 749,000. Well, it was about the same, it was like a 2k difference, which is pretty negligible. And with the tests for all of these Wither Blades complete, let's move on to the conclusion. So with the last Wither Blade test out of the way, let's move on to comparing all of them and seeing what they're good at. Starting off with the Astraea. Now to start off with, if you're a tank, then the Astraea is definitely for you, because clearly it's really good for tanks because it gives a lot of defense. And as I said before, 1200 defense, like that's a ton of defense in dungeons. To my understanding, the Astraea is also used by a lot of mages when they're in dungeons, specifically Master Mode. And although I only do F7 with this, I find the Astraea extremely useful because it just gives that little bit of extra survivability that I'd maybe miss using a Hyperion. And if you think that you're dealing enough damage, then the Astraea is actually a really good way of compromising some of that damage to gain some extra bulk. So next we had the Hyperion. Now the Hyperion was very interesting because it had by far the most intelligence, and this meant ultimately that it was also doing the most damage. Overall, I would recommend the Hyperion for mostly mages, and I think if you're playing another class, then the other Wither Blades are probably better options for you. Although I do think the Hyperion is perfect for mages who want that little bit of extra damage. Moving on to the Scylla, I think the Scylla is perfect for people who are playing more DPS classes that are not mage. And this is because, as I said earlier, the Scylla actually gives the most healing, and it also deals the most left click damage outside of dungeons as well. However, for me, the healing is really what separates the Scylla from the other ones, and in my personal opinion, if you're playing Archer or Berserker, then I definitely recommend this because the healing is actually really useful. And finally, we have the Valkyrie. Now in my opinion, this is actually probably the most underwhelming. The Valkyrie is only really used by Berserkers, and if you're a Berserker, then maybe it's a good option. But if I was playing Berserker with a Terminator, then I would honestly just stick with the Scylla because you get the extra healing. Anyways, that's probably going to wrap it up for this video. If I helped you find what Wither blade was the best for you, then why not scroll down and leave a like and subscribe, because it would really help me out. And with that, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and good luck on your dungeon journeys.